Tonight on Bridge City News, a petition by business owners to shut down arches continues to gain momentum. We have the latest. RCMP say they are scaling back their search in northern Manitoba for 2 BC suspects wanted in connection with 3 murders. And the Canadian military will be receiving $250 million over the next 5 years. We will explain what the money will be going towards.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Numerous people in the Lethbridge community have voiced their concerns about arches, the city's supervised safe consumption and injection site. Residents say that it is affecting the safety of their children and has hurt local business. City Councillor Blaine Higgins is in support of the Lethbridge Citizens Alliance that has started a petition to get rid of arches. Now, he wants the public to know that he's part of the group as a business owner and not as a member of council.
As councillor, I'm not a councillor that started the petition like some people think.
Okay.
I've attended meetings, but as far as to be part of what's going on and find out what's happening in the community. But I'm there as the hat of my print shop, as my business. People know that I've been very, very vocal about what's going on throughout the community, the safety, etc. And as a business owner, I see a lot of it. Other business owners see it all the time, but not just business owners. There's community that see this as well. And so for that reason, as a business owner, I've been attending these meetings and getting a better understanding of what's happening in the community.
Lethbridge City Council has requested an Intox facility, which is currently under review by the provincial government. As for police incidents in North Lethbridge, where Arch is located, it appears as though crime is on the rise. The Lethbridge police have maps showing the amount of demand for law enforcement, and it has increased substantially since the safe consumption site opened. From August 1st to December 31st of 2017, there were 1,919 incidents involving the police. But if you have a look at the crime mapping from August 1st to December 31st of 2018, there were 3,419 incidents. Police and Canada Border Services Agency have released details of what they're calling the largest seizure of methamphetamines in southern Alberta. Authorities say guards found 33 bags of meth in a semi-truck last Sunday at the Coots border crossing. That amount translates to 500,000 doses with a street value of more than $3 million. 40-year-old Asif Mir of Calgary faces many drug charges and had his bail hearing earlier today in Lethbridge. Lethbridge Police, alongside the Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Team, concluded a 3-day vehicle inspection on our highways. Subsequently, Lethbridge College held a graduation ceremony for their Commercial Vehicle Enforcement class. Ainsley O'Reilly reports on the unique event.
Lethbridge College graduated 15 commercial vehicle enforcement officers.
Our officers are provincial peace officers who enforce commercial vehicle regulations and provincial and federal statutes throughout the province.
This year's competency-based program model provides a more hands-on approach.
We're asking the recruits, the students, to demonstrate the actual competencies that they require to do the job that they've been hired to do. So we create evaluation scenarios that they have an opportunity to demonstrate that to us.
Each recruit goes through a court simulation that they have to defend one of the charges that they issued during one of the previous scenarios.
We did a lot of things together. We did physical training, tire flips, runs. We learned how to weigh vehicles, check cargo securement, learn the ins and outs of law. It was a good time.
Rebecca Holt, the class's valedictorian, was the only female to graduate this year.
It was a little rocky being the only female in the class. I was a little scared those first days, but they made me feel accepted and everything. It was just a great time.
An exciting ceremony for an exciting career ahead. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Lethbridge police are investigating an armed robbery at the Flamingo Lounge on 23rd Street North. Police say the incident occurred July 28th, just before midnight. They say a masked male approached the bar with a knife and demanded cash. He was given some money and then fled on foot. The search for the suspect continues. Police provided a surveillance picture and described the perpetrator as about 5 foot 4 inches tall with olive-colored skin. He was wearing a black hoodie with baggy jogging pants, a black mask, running shoes, and black winter gloves. If you've seen this guy, call Lethbridge Police right away at 403-328-4444. A trial date has been set for a 42-year-old Lethbridge man accused of sexual assault. It stems from an incident in which a woman was attacked while showing a home earlier this year. Manish Kumar Kokar will stand trial January 14th of next year. Police heard that when the woman was showing Kokar the home, she was sexually assaulted in the basement. According to police, the woman was able to send a message to nearby co-workers asking for help just as the assailant drove away. Kokar was released from custody following an earlier court appearance. The court implemented a ban on information that could identify the victim or the company she was working for at the time of the assault. Lethbridge fire officials have closed the books on the residential fire last week in North Lethbridge. Investigators say there was no conclusive evidence to determine the cause of the fire, but they deemed it was accidental. Firefighters from 4 stations responded to the blaze along 2400 block of 7th Avenue South on July 26th. The residents and 2 dogs got out safely. One firefighter was taken to hospital with minor injuries. Damage to the home was estimated at $200,000. An investigation wrapped up on another house fire in Lethbridge. This one occurred around 7 p.m. on Tuesday night. Emergency crews were called out to a home at Mount Sundance Place West. When they arrived, they saw smoke coming from the home. It was determined that the fire broke out in the bedroom. There were no injuries and the damage was estimated at $57,000. The fire was determined to be accidental. The fire department then sent out a release reminding us to never leave candles or any open flame unattended. A new bridge for Highway 3 may be put on hold for a while, but Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf says it's for a good reason.
What's best for Lethbridge? Is it the best use of funds to put $100 million to revitalize this bridge when it was just repaired 2 years ago? Or would that be better to set that money aside for the future development of a third bridge and link to the west side, which is something we've been looking at for many years, as well as the fact that Lethbridge has some significant funds, supportive housing. There's the airport development that would increase tourism and travel and the economy. There's items like the catheterization lab, and then the development at exhibition parks. The real challenge, to be completely straightforward with the Highway 3 bridge, is that $100 million promise during the campaign period was not even included in the NDP's budget.
We also reached out to Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips, but she was unavailable for comment. The hot, dry summer combined with early seeding has moved up harvest time for many farmers. Some farmers in Saskatchewan have reported issues with their crops, including disease. A spokesperson with Farming Smarter shares whether or not this will also be a problem in Alberta.
This year, because we're at relatively low precipitation, I think we're at about 3.5 inches below normal. We traditionally are at about 7.5 inches at this point in the growing season from April until now, and we're only at 4.5 inches at this point. So disease pressure is fairly low. I haven't seen a ton of the spores coming up from the south, so we haven't seen a ton of stripe rust.
Most people squirm at the thought of bugs, but if you have kids who are fascinated by them, you might want to take them down to Insect Discovery Day. It is taking place this Saturday at the Alberta Birds of Prey Centre in Coaldale.
And insects are part of a natural, healthy environment. So we've got a group of scientists coming out that work at local institutions like the college, university, and the research station. And they're from the Entomological Society of Alberta. It's a very family-friendly event, and they'll have different stations set up around the site. So if there's one day that people visit during the year, try to make it a Saturday, August 3rd, from 11 till 3. And it's a really fun day. And you can even bring bugs from home. If you're wondering what type of species they are, you can bring bugs from home in jars, and the scientists will help you identify them.
From Team Lethbridge Bisons to Team Alberta to Team Canada, it was a great run for our Lethbridge AAA Under-13 Bisons. They won the Alberta title, then competed in the Nationals in Langley, British Columbia, where they won the Team Canada title on July 25th. From there, they headed to Livermore, California for the Little League World Series, where they played Puerto Rico and were beaten 14-2 on Sunday. They then beat Czech Republic 6-4 in extra innings on Tuesday, but unfortunately, they were eliminated on Wednesday, losing to Mexico 9-0. We caught up with the team's coach, who couldn't be more proud of his boys.
Yeah, honestly, it's been a dream season. I know it probably kind of sounds cliche, but the boys have been outstanding. It's been an absolute pleasure to deal with. Like, for spending almost 3 weeks together, I'm not sure it could have gone much smoother, and we're just so proud of these boys and how they've handled themselves and how they've, competed on the field, and we've got endless umpires, about our boys and how classy they've been, and we just couldn't be more proud of them.
The team is still in California and plans to play a few exhibition games, then do some sightseeing before returning home to Lethbridge on Monday. Transgenderism, it's a term we hear a lot of these days. How many genders are there? Many believe there are only two. Now, we spoke with the chair of transgender studies, Dr. Aaron DeVore, and he gave us his thoughts.
There seem to be new labels for different kinds of gender nuances and shades of gray that are coming up all the time. So there is a lot of discussion and debate about how should we parse this. Should we say there are men and women and a third gender, which is what's done in some places, but in some cultures around the world, there are 4 and 5 and 6 different genders. And in our culture, people are increasingly saying gender is a spectrum.
Catch a very interesting interview with Dr. Aaron DeVore discussing gender identity. That's coming up in the second half of our show. RCMP say they're scaling down the search for 2 murder suspects in northern Manitoba. Assistant Commissioner Jane McLatchie says they will, however, remain in the Gillam area, which was the place of the last 2 confirmed sightings of both Briar Schmigelski and Cam McLeod. McLatchie says there's a possibility that the 2 suspects are dead or got a ride out of the area.
The RCMP and RCAF personnel have logged thousands of hours, working 24/7 during this search for the suspects. However, even with this extraordinary effort, we have not had any confirmed sightings of the suspects since the burned vehicle was located. Taking into account all of the work so far, it has come time to reassess our deployment of resources to the area. Over the next week, the RCMP will begin to scale down the scope of our search efforts in northern Manitoba. This will include the phased withdrawal of the majority of specialized RCMP and RCAF personnel and assets over the coming week. To be clear, we are not ending this search. A number of tactical resources and specialized assets will remain positioned in the Gillam area and will continue the efforts to locate the murder suspects.
The commission examining the case of serial killer Elizabeth Wetlaufer has released their report at Preventing Similar Crimes. The report revealed that there were many failures in long-term care which led to the murder of 8 elderly patients without raising suspicion.
In September of 2016, when Wetlaufer took herself to CAMH in Toronto and confessed to the treating psychiatrist that she had harmed and killed residents for whom she was providing nursing care, she was not under suspicion, she was not under investigation, and not a single one of the offenses that she committed was under suspicion or under investigation. We would not have known about them, period, had she not confessed. So what's the significance of that finding? If we're going to prevent similar tragedies in the future, we cannot continue to do the same things in the same ways in the long-term care system. We cannot. If the system didn't detect it before, it will not detect, deter, and stop it in the future.
Ottawa is planning on spending $250 million for repairs and upgrades to reserve armories and training facilities over the next 5 years. Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan made the announcement in Halifax. Sajjan says $38 million will go to immediate maintenance and repairs across the country this year.
We want you to know that you are valued and you are appreciated. That is why we are ensuring that you are well trained, well equipped, well prepared for operations anytime and anywhere. To do this, you need well-maintained facilities in which to work and to train. Now today, I'm pleased to announce a new reserve infrastructure investment program to make sure that you have what you need. Now our government is moving forward with an immediate investment of about $38 million this year to help reserve units with their immediate needs. Over the next 5 years, we'll be working with the reserve units in an annual call to prioritize $250 million investments into the reserve armories and training facilities across the country.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on the campaign trail at a gathering in Ottawa yesterday. He said Canadians will have a clear choice between his party and the federal Conservatives.
Cuts and austerity or investing in Canadians. The middle class can't afford another Doug Ford. And it's up to every single person in this room to make that case by sharing our positive, ambitious vision for the future. Personal attack ads, the politics of fear and division, smear campaigns. It's exactly the Harper playbook.
It was on this day that Germany declares war on Russia in the First World War. A shooting rampage takes place at a clock tower in Texas, and MTV makes its debut. This is Today in History for August the 1st.
August 1st, 1966. Charles Whitman goes on a shooting rampage at the University of Texas Clock Tower in Austin. With a high-powered rifle, he kills 14 people and wounds nearly 36 others hours after murdering his wife and mother. The killing ends when police gunned down Whitman 90 minutes after the siege at the clock tower began. 1914. Europe's major powers take another fateful step into World War I as Germany declares war on Russia. 1936.
Der ersten Olympiade neuer Zeitrechnung als eröffnet.
Nazi Germany's dictator Adolf Hitler opens the Berlin Olympics. Hitler hopes to use the Games as a showcase for his ideology of racial superiority, but American athlete Jesse Owens shatters that dream by winning 4 gold medals. 1944. An uprising breaks out in Warsaw against Nazi Germany's occupation of Poland during World War II. The 2-month revolt takes place a year after a failed uprising by Warsaw's Jews to resist being sent to a Nazi death camp. 1819. Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, The Tale of the Great White Whale, is born in New York City. And 1981.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
MTV, the channel that put music videos on the pop culture map, debuts on cable.
Are those guys the best?
Today in History, August 1st. Mike Gracia, The Associated Press.
We had another beautiful summer day in the Windy City, but a little bit of rain is on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. Lots of sunshine again today and not quite as hot. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near 12 degrees. A chance of rain developing tomorrow and a high near 30. A nice weekend is shaping up. Sunshine at 27 expected for both Saturday and Sunday. Holiday Monday, lots of blue sky and 27 again. Tuesday and Wednesday, the clouds return, but we should see a high of 28 degrees on both days. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 and an average low of 11. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2000 at 36 degrees, and the record low was 4 in 1939. Sunrise was at 6:01, sunset at 9:14. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. A good chance of rain in Victoria and a high near 23. Expect showers and 20 degrees in Vancouver. Sunshine and 29 degrees for Calgary on Friday. Sunny and 30 is on tap for Edmonton. Regina had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, just a few clouds and a high near 32. Sunshine and 32 degrees as well for Saskatoon. In Winnipeg, expect some thunder shower activity and a high near 31. Sunny and 28 degrees in Toronto tomorrow. Expect a high near 30 in both Ottawa and Montreal. Mainly sunny at Fredericton, New Brunswick, and a high of 27. Pretty much the same picture in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly sunny at 25. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, there's a 40% chance of rain and a high near 24 is in the forecast. There's some more bad news for SNC-Lavalin shareholders. The troubled engineering giant cut its quarterly dividend by 80% as it wrestles with a $2.12 billion net loss in its second quarter. The dividend cut from 10 cents to 2 cents follows a third straight quarter of losses amid a shift under the company's new CEO. His predecessor left in June following the company's handling of a high-profile court case that embroiled the Trudeau government. The interim chief executive, Ian Edwards, admitted today that the company is experiencing some difficult challenges. Energy giant Royal Dutch Shell says its second quarter earnings dropped 26%. The company says it was due to lower oil and natural gas prices overshadowed an increase in production. Earnings based on the current cost of supplies fell from $4.69 billion to $4.2 billion in the same period last year. Shell says that reflected lower oil and gas prices and weaker chemical and refining margins. Net income was down 50% to $3 billion. Geothermal energy appears to be a promising source of clean energy, but what kind of carbon footprint does it leave behind, especially with the plants? Kirsten Marcia is the CEO of Deep Corporation, and she says there is very little carbon footprint at all.
There is no emission. There's no bird migration disturbance. There's no noise. And because they produce so much more power than wind and solar, they actually offset more greenhouse gas emissions than any of their other renewables.
Catch the full interview with Ms. Marcia explaining the benefits of geothermal energy coming up after Business News. In the United States, the Federal Reserve lowered its key interest rate from 2.25 to 2% for the first time in a decade. Analysts say it was to counter threats to the U.S.-China trade war, low inflation, and a dim global outlook.
The outlook for the U.S. economy remains favorable, and this action is designed to support that outlook. It is intended to ensure against downside risks from weak global growth and trade policy uncertainty, to help offset the effects these factors are currently having on the economy, and to promote a faster return of inflation to our symmetric 2% objective. All of these objectives will support achievement of our overarching goal to sustain the expansion with a strong job market and inflation close to our objective for the benefit of the American people.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, police and Canada Border Services Agency have released details of what they are calling the largest seizure of methamphetamine in southern Alberta. Authorities say guards found 33 bags of meth in a semi-truck trailer last Sunday at the Coots border crossing. That amount translates into around 500,000 doses with a street value of $3 million. 40-year-old Asif Mir of Calgary faces many drug charges and had his bail hearing earlier today in Lethbridge. There's been apparently an increase of people across Canada who are transitioning from one gender to another. How should we respond? Dr. Aaron DeVore, Chair of Transgender Studies at the University of Victoria, gives us his thoughts next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Caribbean community invite you to celebrate the Lethbridge Caribbean Carnival Saturday, August 3rd at Galt Gardens beginning at 11 a.m. Enjoy a high-energy atmosphere filled with food, dance, music, and live performances. Admission is free. For more information, visit carabridge.ca. Come out to Galt Gardens and enjoy Shakespeare in the Park 2019 every Thursday and Friday from now until August 9th. The Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society presents the action-packed and exciting play Macbeth. Suitable for all ages, shows are free with an opportunity to donate. Experience the timeless magic of one of Shakespeare's best-known plays. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The 22nd annual Joel Nicholas Arnoldson Memorial Charity Golf Tournament is taking place Friday, August 16th at Paradise Canyon Golf Resort. Green fees are $190 per person, with proceeds going toward the Green Acres Foundation, which provides quality and affordable housing for seniors. For more information and to register, call 403-328-1155. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
There's been a significant increase in the number of people who are transitioning from their biological gender into another. What are some of the reasons behind this, and how should we respond to the trend? Dr. Aaron DeVore, Chair in Transgender Studies, joins me now from the University of Victoria. Dr. DeVore, welcome to Bridge City News.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So, Doctor, until recently, the medical community viewed transgenderism as a type of mental illness, using terms such as gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria, but times have changed. How should we view this today?
Well, the times have changed in the sense that we have a lot more transgender people who are coming out and who are speaking out on their own behalf, and we're hearing from transgender people. So in the past, we only really heard from medical professionals who are the ones who cast the decision that this was a mental illness. And now the transgender people are able to have their voices heard largely through social media. And somewhat through participation in the medical professional community, because there are many transgender people who are also medical professionals, we're starting to see a shift in the understanding of what it means to be transgender. And that shift is moving in the direction of understanding it as part of the natural human diversity.
So what's the big difference then between someone who self-identifies as the opposite of their biological gender and someone who is, let's say, gender fluid?
Well, first of all, let me talk about the biological gender concept, because in the professional community and in the transgender community, we usually talk about biological sex, which refers to physical characteristics, and then we talk about gender, which is more about your mental state, your social position, how you see yourself, what your identity is. So people are changing more their gender, and then you ask about transgender and gender fluid. So transgender is an umbrella term that refers to a great range of gender identities, anything that is other than people identifying as exactly what you would expect on the basis of their physical sex. And that would include gender fluid in many people's minds, but not in everybody's minds. So for some people, transgender refers to people who have taken a position for themselves in binary gender. And by binary gender, I mean the idea that there are men and there are women, and there's nothing in between. And people who are gender fluid are people who are saying, well, actually, there's a lot in between. And they identify as something in between, or they may move around from one end of that binary spectrum to the other end, and sometimes be on the man or the woman end of the spectrum, and sometimes be in the middle.
And I understand there's a belief that there are other genders as well, possibly more than we've talked about. Can you explain?
Well, there seem to be new labels for different kinds of gender nuances and shades of gray that are coming up all the time. So there is a lot of discussion and debate about how should we parse this. Should we say there are men and women and a third gender, which is what's done in some places, but in some cultures around the world, there are 4 and 5 and 6 different genders. And in our culture, people are increasingly saying gender is a spectrum, and there are no hard and fast points other than perhaps the end points. And everything in between can be continue to be defined in different ways, in individual ways, just like each of us has our own personal name, and yet there is a category called names. And there are names that sometimes we think of as men's names, sometimes as women's names, and sometimes there are names that belong to anybody and could be any gender or no gender. And in the same way, people are starting to say, you know what, gender is a range, and we can be anywhere in that range.
Now, it's one thing for a person to genuinely believe that they're trapped in the wrong body, but there appears to be a lack of scientific evidence to back that up. Your thoughts?
Well, 2 thoughts. First of all, the idea of trapped in the wrong body is kind of an old concept that comes to us from the 19th century. And it's still around, obviously, but not everybody feels that they're trapped in the wrong body. So there's more about feeling that they should be or are something other than what you would expect of them, stereotypically on the basis of their sex characteristic. So what scientific evidence is there for this? We're seeing an increasing number of studies that would lead us to believe that there is a biological basis. I'm not prepared to say it's proven as yet, but I am prepared to say that the evidence is increasing all the time. And what it looks like is something like this, that at the time that an infant or a fetus is in utero, there is a point in development where the genitals form. You probably know from biology class that we all start out with the potential to have either kind of genitals, and under the influence of chromosomes and hormones, a certain set of genitals are produced. At a later state, various brain structures are produced. At a later stage, various brain structures are produced. And what we're finding today is that when you look at the brain structures of transgender people, and you look at them before they've been through any kind of treatment, any kind of hormonal treatment or surgical treatment, and you look at, are their brain structures similar or the same as the gender they identify with, or similar or the same as the genitals would lead you to believe they should identify. And the evidence is mounting that there is a disconnect in the development of the brain and the genitals, and that the brain is a stronger predictor of what a person's gender identity is going to be than the genitals.
Now, there seems to be a dramatic increase in children seeking to transition. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the emphasis on seems to be. And so what I think we're seeing is that there have always been a number, a fairly significant minority of children or people of any age who are transgender. And we now live in a time where there is a widespread knowledge. I was going to say understanding, but not everybody understands, but a widespread knowledge of the existence of transgender. And so people, children at a young age, know that this exists because they learn about it, or they don't even know that it exists, and they simply say, if they're very young, they simply say, "Mommy, why does everybody think I'm a boy? I'm really a girl." And in an earlier day, those parents would have come down very hard on that child. And they would have said, "That's crazy. I don't ever want to hear you say that again." And if you do, some parents would have beat it out of the child. And so they would suppress this in the child through their response to it. Whereas today, a great many parents, when their child says something like that, they go on the internet, they type into Google, "My son thinks he's a girl," and they find out all about transgender. And one of the things they find out is that in the past, when children were treated that way, they very often developed a lot of mental health issues. They very often developed into kids who acted out in all sorts of self-destructive ways. And unfortunately, a lot of them end up at suicide. And so they say to themselves, "I'd rather have a child who is transgender and alive," even if it freaks them out, because a lot of parents, when they first hear this and think their child might be transgender, are scared, horrified, they think it's terrible. But as they learn something about it, they realize it's not so terrible. A transgender person can have a perfectly decent life. And if they suppress it, it's very possible they will lose that child. Either the child will run away from home, will become drug addicted, will have all kinds of problems because they can't live who they really are, and they might even die. They might even commit suicide.
Some stats show that traditionally, many children who question their gender grow out of this and are content with their biological gender once they become adults. So would it be wiser to wait before using puberty and hormone blockers on vulnerable kids?
Okay, so there's two parts to your question. All right, so first of all, the stats. All right, so there are some statistics that people like to quote a lot that say most kids grow out of this. Well, it depends on which kids you're talking about. So the question there is, do we have the ability to determine which kids are serious and which kids are just having a phase? Because some kids do just get ideas and they grow out of them. And they get ideas about all sorts of things, and there's no reason why they shouldn't get ideas about gender as well. And so we have to have a way to figure out which ones are serious, which ones really are transgender. And so one of the watch phrases that trained therapists will use is they're looking for the kids who are consistent, insistent, and persistent. And so when those kids are like that, by the time they get to puberty, what we find is any kid who has been consistent, insistent, and persistent all the way through to puberty, there's a very low, almost zero rate of kids who will change their mind at that point. Right? So the kids who change their mind or figure it out or come to terms with it, they're mostly in those earlier years where they, I think, should be allowed to be gender fluid so they have an opportunity to explore and figure out what is right for them and what's not right for them. But if they come to puberty and they persist that long and they're still insistent and they have been consistent all along, very, very, very few of those children, I don't have numbers for you, but it's approaching zero, will ever change their mind. The other thing I need to say about that is those statistics do not follow those kids into adulthood. And so when you get a statistic that says this percentage of kids have gone away and are living in their gender, if you follow them, a lot of those kids, if they're still alive when they're in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s and even in their 50s, are the people who transition as adults. So what's happened is they have repressed it because their social environment has said to them, you can't do this, the price is too high. And later in life, when they're adults and they feel they have enough autonomy, they transition. But they don't show up in those statistics about which kids desist, stop doing it.
Now, there seem to be a significant number of feminists who do not agree that a trans woman is truly a woman. Even some female athletes who have argued that a trans woman should not compete in the same sport because many times the trans woman is physically stronger. Your thoughts?
Again, there's two parts to your question. So are trans women really women? And well, that depends on what you mean by really women, all right? So I like to use an analogy about Canadian citizenship or citizenship, right? So we have many citizens who are born here. And we have many citizens who have immigrated to Canada and have gone through an immigration process and have been given Canadian citizenship. They're all Canadian citizens, but some are naturalized Canadian citizens and some are naturally born in Canada citizens. And so I think trans women are really women in the same sense that our new Canadians who have gone through the entire immigration process and been given Canadian citizenship are also Canadians. And with some who go through that, years and years later, you can still tell that they're immigrants. And others, years and years later, you would never know that they hadn't spent their entire life in Canada. And we see the same thing with trans women. Some assimilate very well, and some don't assimilate so well. But they're still women. I think of it, the analogy, naturalized women.
But how about that physical characteristic? You know, if they were born biologically male and they've got bigger muscles, they're taller, they're stronger, would they not have the advantage in certain sports over women who were, born as a female?
Yeah, this is a very active debate. And I am not a sport expert, but I can tell you a little bit about where the discussion is going. And so there are some advantages, and now we're talking about trans women. Very few people are worried about trans men competing against cisgender men. Cisgender is the term we use for people who are not transgender. But people are worried about transgender women or trans women competing against cisgender women. And many of the advantages that they're concerned about do fade with the loss of testosterone input and the increase of estrogen, but not all of them. So bone structure doesn't change. Muscle mass does change significantly. Hip to waist ratio, those kinds of things. There's a number of things that don't change. And so where a lot of the discussion is going, and it's not yet resolved, is that perhaps we can do something in our sports that's similar to what we do in boxing. So we have weight classes. And in boxing, that has been determined to be the important factor. I'm not enough of a sport expert to say, how would we divide up people who are runners? How would we divide up people who are cyclists? How would we divide up people who are skiers? But I think that's the direction it's going, is that we're going to find a way to make even competition among classes of people who have close enough characteristics that it's a fair competition, and that it doesn't have to be on the basis of gender. There can be other ways that we can divide that.
What do you think of the movement toward requiring others to address a trans person by their preferred pronoun? Professor Jordan Peterson disagrees with it, calling it compelled speech, which would violate our right to freedom of speech. But how do you see it?
Well, each of us has a name, and there are far more names than there are pronouns. And it is simply a matter of decency and politeness to try and learn someone's name when you meet them. Now, some of us are better at it than others. I often have to apologize for not doing very well at remembering people's names, but I try because I think it's just common decency and respect to do that. There's far fewer pronouns. I do not think it is an unreasonable burden to ask people to also make an attempt to learn the pronouns that people prefer.
What would you like to see from the faith community? It seems unlikely that there will be 100% agreement on the issue, and there will be differing viewpoints on this. So how can we really bridge the gap?
Well, with all things, social change is uneven. And so it can be very rapid in some quarters and very slow in others. And some people resist social change because they feel that it's a threat to their lifestyle and what's important to them and their values. But I've certainly seen a lot of faith communities want to grapple with this, want to deal with this, and want to do it in a way that is respectful and leaves people with a sense of caring and dignity. And what I hope for is that faith communities will reach into their hearts and find a way to allow all members of their communities to feel connected, to feel loved, and to feel included. And I don't have a prescription for how any particular faith community has done that, but I encourage people to look to other faith communities who have taken the lead and who are a little further along in the process, because I know that it is being done in many communities. I'm often asked to come in and speak to church communities about transgender, because they want to educate themselves and they want to learn and they want to do well by the people in their midst who are themselves transgender, or the many families, many families who have transgender members in them. And so faith communities are moving on this, and the best advice I can give is look to those who have already made the moves.
Dr. Erin DeVore, Chair in Transgender Studies at the University of Victoria, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you.
Geothermal energy. It is looking like a very promising source of clean energy. How well does it work? Is it cost effective? Kirsten Marcy is our guest today. She's a geologist and CEO of Deep Corporation, acronym for Deep Earth Energy Production, a Saskatchewan-based geothermal energy company, and she joins me from Saskatoon. Kirsten, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you briefly share with a lot of our viewers who may not be familiar with what geothermal energy is?
Absolutely. So geothermal energy is natural heat from the center of the earth. So really, as long as the center of the earth remains hot, and let's hope it does, we have a constant, renewable, sustainable energy supply. What we're doing here in Saskatchewan is different than just heating a house. We're going to extremely hot, deeper zones within the earth where it's hot enough that we can actually generate power.
So how do you go about reaching this heat source really deep in the ground, and then how do you convert it into energy to heat homes?
So we drilled the deepest well ever drilled in Saskatchewan at 3,530 meters depth. At that depth, we can encounter 120 and 130 degrees Celsius fluids. We say it's water, but really it's a salty brine. And this brine is sourced all the way from the Rocky Mountains and goes all the way to South Dakota. They call it the basal Cambrian sandstone. It's a sandstone that sits on top of the really, really old crystalline basement rocks. And so what we do is we drill deep into this brine and have these very, very large producing wells where we mine the heat out of the water, take that heat, run it through a heat exchanger. That heat is then introduced to a working fluid, a refrigerant that can flash from the liquid phase to the vapor phase, and that's what drives the turbine. And then that cooled water gets injected back into the earth for reheating, some distance away from where we're producing from.
I think many of us have heard about residential homes using geothermal for heating, but the electricity part, maybe not so much. So how much different is the process to make electricity?
So this first project that we're doing is a smaller project. It's 5 megawatts, and every megawatt of power is roughly equivalent to 1,000 homes. So this first demonstration facility is 5,000 homes, but it really has the ability to both scale up at the first location. So just by drilling more wells, we can build a larger facility. But spaced along the southern part of our province in Saskatchewan, we'd like to build many of these facilities, growing to maybe 200, 300 megawatts of total consumption. We don't want to oversell this too soon or too early in the stage, but think of it as a large size wind farm, 100 megawatt wind farm to begin with.
So let's chit-chat a bit about the pilot project funded in part by the federal government to develop that, as you mentioned, a 5 megawatt geothermal electricity generation facility near Estevan, Saskatchewan. Will this be a first for Canada?
It is the first for Canada, and it's shocking to me. I've spent my lifetime, developing our resources here in Saskatchewan. But believe it or not, the United States is the largest producer of geothermal power in the world. And yet we don't have a single megawatt of geothermal power here. So we're very excited about getting this industry kick-started for Canada. We believe there's some great projects in Alberta, BC. Really the idea is to break barriers with this first project through this federal funding and really get this industry going.
So Kirsten, if the project ends up succeeding, is the plan then to go to maybe the next level and develop a full-scale 200 megawatt electricity generation plant?
That's right. I mean, we'll have to do this, based on the revenue of these projects. We'll use the revenue that we have in this first project and move that to fund subsequent facilities. One of the great attributes of geothermal is it has a really high cash flow. And what that means is that because we're baseload power, which means we're producing power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're producing 3 times the revenue that wind or solar would have, which is an intermittent power source. So although geothermal can be a little bit more expensive to build, it pays back very, very quickly because of that very high cash flow.
Let's talk about some of your overhead. What kind of numbers are we talking about? Maybe share with our viewers how expensive that can be.
So the capital cost for geothermal is typically about $6 to $8 million per megawatt to build. But what's really important is the operating and maintenance costs are very low. So once they're up and running, they don't take many people. There's very little maintenance, and repair work going on. We akin them to, the lonely Maytag repairman. So, once they're going, that one lonely Maytag repairman can really oversee several facilities all at once.
Talk a bit about the clean energy portion of this here. How much of a carbon footprint is left behind, and what kind of pollution would a plant like this actually produce?
Zero. So these facilities, when they're up and running, there's no emissions that are given off. All of the fluids are closed loop, so the hot water comes up, it goes right back into the ground. The refrigerant we're using is also closed loop, so there is no emissions. There's no bird migration disturbance, there's no noise, and because they produce so much more power than wind and solar, they actually offset more greenhouse gas emissions than any of their other renewables.
Why do you think more companies haven't actually come forth and invested in geothermal compared to the wind farms that we see and the solar cells everywhere?
Well, that's a great question. One of the reasons we've had a long energy holiday of low prices. Our provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, we've been utilizing fossil fuels, coal generation for decades, and there's been a real shift in what the consumers want. And I think it's things like geothermal, which may be a bit expensive out of the start, have to be part of a rational mix of supply options. We want to introduce them, get them going, have the costs come down so that, over the next few years, they can have a much more significant seat at the table.
Are you receiving any pushback from environmentalist groups over concerns that drilling deep into the ground could potentially cause earthquakes or maybe some other environmental issues, perhaps harming wildlife?
We haven't had any pushback. One of the beauty of this project, it's right in the heart of the Bakken oil field. So the only time people get concerned about drilling rigs moving is if they're not moving in this part of the world. So there's a wonderful regulatory framework for all drilling activities to make sure that all wells are drilled very safely and that all potential environmental hazards are considered and taken care of.
Now, you said you had to dig pretty deep here, over 3,000 meters. How many holes to produce 200 megawatts?
Well, 200 megawatts is yet to be seen yet how many wells that's going to take. But let me talk about this first facility. We've modeled it to have 3 production wells and 2 injection wells. Now, we had some nice surprises in the first well that we drilled. The flow rates look much better than we expected, and it's hotter than we expected. So going back to the beginning of our conversation, we're heat mining. So high flowing wells with lots of heat means that we can mine more heat out of less wells.
How much land area would be required for the electricity plant?
The surface area is very small, actually. So, we're talking about a couple of acres. Most of what you're going to see in a facility is the piping towards the central facility, but they're very small. Think of a couple of Quonsets for each facility on the prairie horizon.
Now, what about terrain? Farmland is pretty good to drill through, but are there other areas of Canada where it might be a little more difficult to drill deep enough to get a good solid heat source?
Well, that's a great question, because the challenge is getting deep enough in the earth where the drilling costs are still reasonable. I mean, when we drill in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, we're drilling through butter. It's very easy to drill. Versus if you go out to Ontario or Quebec, you have to drill through granitic rocks, but at those depths are not going to be very permeable. They're not going to have fluids in them. So, what we believe deep and some other projects in Alberta is that the lowest hanging fruit for easy project development is within the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin.
Now, Kirsten, we talked a bit about upfront costs, millions of dollars to start up, but there's going to be a solid return on investment afterwards. But how would you compare the upfront costs with geothermal compared to coal-fired or natural gas energy plants?
Well, it's hard to compare with coal-fired because what we think of traditional coal-fired generation, we don't have that anymore. So the traditional coal-fired plants that we built here in Saskatchewan in the 60s, they're built very cheaply. And we have an infinite resource of lignite coal in Saskatchewan. The challenge is that we're not building and are continuing to use conventional coal. Our province invested $1.6 billion into a carbon capture project, world-class project, wonderful project here in the province, in order to capture the CO2 and inject it back into the ground. World-class project, but it didn't come with a very small price tag to make that happen. So comparing apples to apples, the United States believes that on an apples-to-apples basis, the fact that we don't have to buy a fuel, we don't have to run something when it's not running. It's the United States believes that geothermal is the cheapest form of all energy options, including nuclear.
Yeah, I'm told. I mean, the big benefit is more stability to the price of electricity simply because geothermal does not rely on fossil fuels, which fluctuate, right?
That's right. Yeah, we don't have to buy a fuel.
At what point in the future do you expect to actually have this pilot project feeding electricity into the grid?
So we're on track right now to be fully commissioned with electrons on the grid by Q1 of 2022. We may do that a bit quicker. One of the long lead items is the surface facility itself, the turbine technology. And the manufacturers always give a much longer lead time until they're in a competitive bid. We believe that once we're in a competitive bid, 6 months from now, that those times will shorten up.
Kirsten, you must have some challenges, though, digging that deep into the Earth's core. I mean, 3,000 meters. What are some of the challenges that your company runs into?
Well, the drilling expertise that we have in Saskatchewan and Alberta is world class. I mean, we can be really proud of the labor force and the actual physical technology that we have here. So the drilling is not a challenge whatsoever. And the irony in this project is that we wouldn't even know that geothermal resource existed if it weren't for the oil and gas industry. They discovered it in their exploring for fossil fuels. The biggest challenge in this project, not dissimilar to a small junior company that's exploring for gold or base metals or diamonds, is the access to capital. Finding investors at the early stage to support projects, to see the vision, the future of building a more diverse energy future for the province is sometimes challenging. There's a lot of investors that will come up later and pay double for when there's no risk. But we've been very fortunate and very grateful in the past few months to have a huge amount of support from investors, both in Saskatchewan, but particularly within Calgary.
And I'm wondering, would the banks jump on board as well, knowing that you have a very low carbon footprint, right?
Well, we have a government contract. It's a 25-year contract with SaskPower. That's a AAA rated, locked-in contract. And so, once we're in the construction phase, that's a very, very bankable contract for the lenders.
Kirsten Marcy, a geologist and CEO of Deep Corporation. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.